Hello, Exile viewers. I'm back with what will probably be my last video before the League launch, unless special information comes out pertaining to a certain build guide that's already been released. I'm here to talk about what I'm doing for the League start, because as I've talked about in my Kitawa Source Guide, I wanted to get away from that build. I think I've started it 3 leagues in a row now, and I've at least played it the last 5. And what I've cooked up today is Infernal Blow, with a 2-hander. Probably a little bit different. I've played a version of this build in the past, and I kind of wanted to revisit it with the buffs, and what I found was the more I worked on it, the more I found ways to just improve the damn thing, and it's actually looking pretty good now. So, the first thing I need to say is this is not a build guide, but the POB will be there, and I'm going to explain how it works in case someone else wants to try it, or if they're just generally interested in how I'm getting things done with this build. I would say the build's kind of worth looking at just because it does something a little interesting. For starters, not so interesting this part. Infernal Blow explodes corpses, which means that the clear is almost guaranteed going to be a little bit effortless. Just the overlapping melee splashes on a bunch of enemies, they're all going to explode. It's going to clear well, pretty much guaranteed, even with a tiny fraction of the DPS that I currently have rigged up in it right now. The Ascendancy, and this is part of the reason why I like to play it on Chieftain, comes with an inherent 7 link in the form of a level 30 Ancestral Call. This looks pretty bad, honestly, but you'll notice I would actually lose quite a bit of DPS if I uncheck this, and the reason for that is once Ancestral Call gets past level 20, it actually starts adding more damage. So this is kind of a 10% more damage multiplier onto our skill, as well as giving us our strike targets. And because we're getting extra strike targets, we get to use this attack mastery for something else. Specifically, monsters cannot block, which is huge value for comfort in mapping just in general. I'd say if we were doing bosses, we could probably unspec this and go pick something else. We could get 5% attack speed. We could change the way cost is calculated. We could add some strike range. Honestly, the strike range one isn't even that bad. Just like, for instance, Maven. Maven can be very annoying for melee builds, and this gives us a little bit more to deal with there. Now, as for why the build is interesting, if you look at it, you're going to notice my DPS calculations are a little weird. And the reason for that is because I have 2 instances in my full DPS being calculated here. One with the debuff explosion of Infernal Blow at 6 stacks, so it's just the DPS of the 6 stacks, and then the other one is just the melee hit portion. And we have these together both being calculated because the debuff hits really hard when it goes off, and it's completely divorced from the actual melee damage. You can see the currently it's 1.3 million damage when it hits, and we're actually scaling the ignite of that alongside the standard hit damage of the skill. So it's a hybrid ignite skill, which is something I don't see a lot of. And one of the reasons we do that is because we're actually kind of investing in stun, which is really incentivized through this node here, Concussive Force. This gives hit stun as though dealing 50% more melee fire damage. That's worth mentioning because the baseline kind of stun calculations from way back in the day, and I want to say, well, more probably best described as like the more modern version, is that your stun, the baseline is if you're doing melee, that's... I can explain. The baseline is to go from melee damage, right? Melee damage in general, we'll say that's 100%. If you're doing ranged or spells, I think you lose some percentage. It used to be 25, and I think it's actually been made even worse because they want to make it much harder to stun with those kinds of attacks. So we're at 100%. If you're all physical, you gain like a 25% multiplier. If you have this node, you get a 50% multiplier. Fire damage in a big enough number is actually one of the better stunning vehicles in the game. And when we stun someone, we get 20% more melee damage. In order for that to be applicable against really big enemies, we need to have a bit of stun investment, which we do. Additionally, we want to be able to stand still when we're fighting things. We don't have to stand still for very long to get them covered in ash, but that's a very nice boost to our damage. And then we have things like this. 30% increased damage is good. The penetration, not so much. One of the weirder things about the build is when you use Ramako's Sun's Light, your dots have really good support in the resistance category, but it doesn't actually affect your hits. So there's kind of some anti-synergy that happens between the two of those that we have to work around. Technically, there is a way to play the build where you cut this entirely, and it's just better for everything overall. That's a little harder to get working, though. You need a double curse setup, and you need to have a way to apply them effectively, which I have some theories on how to do, but that's very experimental. As for the actual stuns themselves, one of the reasons why I'm pretty confident we're going to stun well is we have, first of all, the one big hit, but also we have a tremendous amount of reduced stun threshold. The stun threshold for normal people, like at 100% with no reductions, is 100%. This is 15%. We're bringing them down that much to get it in there. The stun duration doesn't have to be very long, so I haven't really invested in that. I just want the hit, that explosion to stun, so it gets that big extra damage. And then the stun itself is kind of a little bonus for survivability in that it interrupts them. And while we're talking about our actual hits giving us some survivability, the one Mace Mastery we take lets us inflict chill. This is really cool, because not only does it slow enemies down, and not only do we have a big hit to apply it effectively, I think it was reading... Yeah, we are going to have the wrong one, sorry. A 26% chill against pinnacle bosses off of the big hit, which is very nice. That's nice, but the really, really big thing is we do run Diadian Dawn, as any attack ignite build should, and that's going to activate our attack leech, which normally, if you're playing a left side build and you're running fire damage as a Chieftain, one of the biggest headaches, period, is you don't actually have any easy source of leech. And in fact, old Chieftain used to have leech built in, and they've kind of removed that, which I despise that. But we found a way around it. You know, this build uniquely kind of works that in. So it works out. We are avoiding blood magic, which is kind of very trendy right now. And in the earlier tests, I did run this, but I found that using stuff that just reserved less mana to leave some up was better, because a tincture is a massive bonus of damage when we activate it. Like, even just the elemental damage version one, I'm pretty sure the fire damage one is going to end up being better, possibly. I don't know for sure, but it's a tremendous amount of elemental damage. Really, you can't write this off. And it's got a cooldown, and it gives mana burn, but we can manage that. Additionally, while I'm showing like what the build has active, the banner is also not default planted. When these are both up, the DPS goes way up for that window, which is good, because when you invest in a DPS window, that tends to be more effective with Ignite, because the Ignite is going to have that damage for the full hit when you apply it. Kind of a snapshot type thing. Additionally, we use Trauma because it gives some reduced stun threshold. It is not calculated to maximum trauma, though. I've taken some off, because we need a second occasionally. I believe I counted this out to be like 12.5% of the time we're going to stop attacking, and that was on the generous side, but we need to give ourselves a moment, because this is a Warcry build. You cannot play Chieftains as melee if you're not investing in Seon's Sun's Roar. This node is incredible. We have like 85% increased Warcry buff effect, which comes out to like 45% physical added as extra fire for Infernal Cry, which is a big part of what makes this very strong. We also get full endurance charges on command with Enduring Cry, massive regen when we pop it. Intimidating Cry gives us a huge move speed boost, and also some double damage attacks when we're swinging. And I'm actually using the additional 6-link of my weapon to make these more effective, which was kind of a nice little bonus, because I was really wondering, with totems gone, what am I supposed to do with an extra 6-link on a 2-handed build? And this is what I came up with, and I feel like this is really good, because it takes more pressure off the mana, and it gives us urgent orders, which, with this in here, the war cries are going to be instant. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to feel good to use them, because they're going to come out so quickly. And honestly, the trauma stacks are probably going to be a little higher than what I've said here, maybe 1 or 2 more, but that's kind of negligible, and I always try to err on the side of lower. Speaking of which, our DPS calculations are set to Guardian Pinnacle, so you're seeing the actual DPS against the boss, not some fluffed up number, which usually on a clear speed build, I don't worry about that too much, but this build kind of gets there a little bit with the single target, which is very important, because it needs to show a slightly better number than in, say, a caster build. If you want to get at least your first 2 Void Stones, this definitely gets that, probably no problem. But if you want to get, say, Uber Elder and Maven down, you've got to get probably over that 5 million hump, which this doesn't. And that's 5 million POB, which is... it's never genuine. That's an important thing to remember about POB DPS. You got to look at uptime and stuff. The uptime on this is pretty good, because we're not showing all of the stuff that can be added in. I don't even have any flasks ordained. Everything going on here is stuff that we can have up all the time, and it's kind of made up in a way to show that it's active all the time. The only thing that's maybe a little dubious is flammability, but flammability doesn't apply to the dot anyways. Also, Alchemist Mark is only level 1 because of dexterity requirement problems, and also this needs to have Mark on hit attached to it, which is probably going to drop the DPS a bit. A little bit. We could also self-cast it, and it would be permanent, and then you'd get that 100k back, but dealer's choice. I'd rather have it be convenient, personally. So the only thing about this POB right now that's a little dubious is the defenses. I have them on the lighter side of things, because I have a feeling that when we actually see the new gear, what you're going to need is going to go way down. I have some things missing in like the simulated gear, like I don't have any implicits on the body armor yet because I don't know if more max res or that fizz damage taken as mod is going to be more valuable early on. I also don't know if you can get them both together or if they're going to be mutually exclusive. I don't know what damage mods will be able to fit in because of what shakes out where. I don't know, you know? So I'm leaving this a little bit like that, and I'm kind of leaving it in a state. Maybe I will self-cast it, actually. That looks like a pain in the butt. It is actually dropping the DPS a little bit. We'll see. I'm going to leave it in there right now just because I'd rather it look lower but more comfortable to play, because 5.6 million is still plenty for like 90% of the stuff in the game, 95 even. So, yeah, we have some melee concern, or not melee concerns. So yeah, we have like some slight defense concerns because I don't know exactly what's going to be going on with the build, but there are things we can move around pretty easily, and there's a lot of damage we could cut, and the build would still at least perform well. So it's got that buffer zone, but again, this is a little bit experimental. So if you do look at this and you're like, oh, I want to try that, understand there's like a fall flat on the face outcome here, but the build absolutely should clear well so that if it does fall flat on its face, it can fund your next build, which that's the best way to do something that you're not 100% sure on. Be like, well, if it sucks, at least it'll get me to the next one, you know? We do have a little bit of premium in the build showing with the equipment, not the Deity and Dawn or the Embrace, although the weapon, I would say, is pretty damn good. We have this cluster jewel, or not cluster jewel. It's in the place of a cluster jewel. We have this jewel that's going to drop from the new King of the Mist, the Light of Meaning. We put it here because we invest in this part of the tree pretty heavily. And one of the reasons why we go for this is because when it's located here with all these nodes allocated, it's like 144% fire damage. Losing this is pretty big, I won't lie. As you can see, the DPS isn't like unfortunate, right? 4.6 mil is still plenty for most things. In fact, I think Steel Mage has the famous 4.5 mil clip. This pushes it kind of into a much bigger comfort zone, though. I would say I'd want to get this before I go do Maven. Uber Elder is probably fine without it because Uber Elder is a more forgiving fight, especially for melee. And yeah, the build does pretty well. Some of the things in here, I would say you don't want to shy away from. For instance, I'm a little bit lax on the defenses, even though we have things like 5 endurance charges, which you know how cooked those are now. That's also 20% elemental reduction. So the 82% all res here is actually much better than it looks when you factor in that. Additionally, we have these notes here for, well, some armor, of course, which helps make up for the fact that we are not running determination, but with the new bases, I get the feeling this is probably going to be better. We have that armor there. We also have 30% reduced extra damage from crits, 20% there, and then another 30% here, which is 80%. And I love that stat. If you've seen any of my build guides, you know how much I gush over it. It basically takes your max hits and it makes it so they don't have to be as high, because you generally have to factor in the ability for you to get crit, and if getting crit does not boost the damage by a significant amount, you're in a much happier place. And these don't look great right now. That armor value for the Fizz max hit is going to go way up, though. I'm expecting that to be at least 3,000 points higher, if not significantly more. Molten Shell is not on currently, which would also pump things up quite a bit, so you have that ability to get defenses going when you need them. And none of these are giving me special defensive benefits, except for maybe the regen of Enduring Cry. All of these more or less are for comfort and damage, which is what I like to do with my temporary buffs. A temporary defensive buff sucks. let's just say it. Temporary defensive buffs, I don't like them. I don't like when GGG designs them. I think that every banner except for War Banner is trash, because if it's not up all the time, it's not up when you need it. Right? Eventually that's going to happen and it's going to get you killed. And I really prefer to stay away from that. Anyway, I think the build's going to be quite strong, at least as far as a league start is concerned. Will it last maybe outside of 2 weeks? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if I'm going to have the most time to play this league anyway. There is a bit of flexibility in the build. There's a lot of things we could move around and cut if we really needed to. There's some masteries we could drop that I don't really want to drop personally, because I like what they do, but there are definitely some masteries we could drop. There's definitely some smaller life nodes we could give up that could be moved around to other places if we find that there's shortcomings in the build. One of my biggest concerns probably is going to be mana efficiency, but I've left it with room to use a mana flask. If you don't like mana flasks, shit. That's what it's going to be. I guess you could drop a support in favor of, what is it called? Life tap, which is fine. We actually run life tap on our cries as well, just to relieve some mana pressure there. So it won't actually be that bad for the mana. The only thing we actually are concerned about for mana cost is on our attack. And technically, we have some interesting long-term prospects. I do have the crazy stuff. So I do have some stuff that I've been looking into. I kind of have like a crazy stuff tree where I'm looking at slightly more experimental changes. And in this one specifically, we switched to Anger over Herald of Ash, involving a Watcher's Eye switch, which gets the DPS up a little bit. I think from what it was at 5.6. Depending on how you operate your mark, this actually goes up or down, like that. It's a pretty sizable bonus just to have that one thing. This is running 2 anger mods, but there is a kind of theorized option where we run a third anger mod. Sorry, not a third anger mod, a third Watcher's Eye mod, in addition to these two, which would be for clarity, which is damage recouped as mana. And we basically leverage our own trauma to sustain our mana, which is kind of an idea going forward. I think that'll work. It's probably going to be very expensive and like way down the line, but at that point, we don't need a lot of mana, and I just think that's cool as hell. Again, we're probably still going to run a mana flask, which I'm sure that's going to turn some people right off. But even if you're not looking at this build like, oh, that's cool, I should try that. The real reason I'm making this video is so people can see more ways to play the game that are opening up because of the changes being made in the game. Again, the POV will be down below if you want to look at it yourself. And yeah. So anyway, that's the build. As you can see, we beat the 4.5 million breakpoint. We're above average Steel Mage, yeah. I'm really excited for the league. I hope you are too. I hope if you didn't really see anything here that you were like, oh, I should play this, even though it's not a build guide. I hope you at least saw something here that was like, oh, that's a cool way to do a build, or something that you can maybe even use in your own build. That's my favorite, like my personal favorite reason to check out this sort of stuff. And I will see you on Friday. Nino and I are going to be streaming together. Well, he'll be streaming with me. He's not going to be making the trek this time, but he'll be there while we're making our way through Axe, probably very quickly, because he's got a Zizaran Ground Slam build lined up, which looks very good if you are looking for a slightly more reliable, less experimental build. But I have pretty good faith that this is going to clear very quickly. Probably going to be doing Blight stuff at the start, because Corpse Explosion always works really well with Blight, even on a melee build. And they kind of made it so that gold oil is going to be more valuable, I think, with oil extractors being removed. Anyway, I hope you have a good one.